So welcome everybody to Friends of the Beautiful. I am working on and thinking about my course I'm doing next week. So I think I'm teaching on parallax on beauty. And last week's, gotta be honest, I feel like the course was kind of mixed results. So I'm working on my next lecture, and I'm really thinking through the kind of feedback and the vibes I picked up in the room about the course, and I thought what was lacking in it, and then I'm chewing and processing on how the lecture this week can address that and build on it. So that's what I'm thinking about this week. Just want to throw that out there in the group discussion. But Javier, Luber, what's on your guys' mind?
I mean, I'll just go. I mean, obviously, I have other things, but one thing I have been looking into a lot recently is card collecting investments, right? And so I was talking to, I mean, I've talked to you on the side, and I've talked to you, Luber, on the side about this too, where it's like, I realized something today that I thought was pretty ironic, which is, okay, so when the market, like, when we talk about lack, it seems for the most part when there's a disparity or a scarcity, people will pursue that card because it's scarce, it's scarce. And so, I had this talk, with you, Jockin, I believe, where it's like, okay, so that means we should be the one driving the market instead of lack driving the market, right? We should instead use lack to drive the market versus us being driven by the market via lack. But then I came across an interesting issue. And the interesting issue I came across, which is, and this is like the rational impasse here, which is, what's the point of pursuing a theme of something when, like, I feel like the forcing function is the fact that I can't buy those expensive cards. So I feel like I have to construct a theme to create a scarcity and then pursue it in my own way, right? Pursue the hobby in my own way, right? However, I thought about this. What if those cards drop to an extremely cheap price? Wouldn't I just want to buy them? Wouldn't I just kind of drop my theme after that? Because I realized that something dropping to a cheap price actually remotivates my incentive. Because previously the condition was, oh, it's too expensive, so I'm going to pursue a different line of trajectory. Like, we need a different driving market. But then I also thought, it seems like my intentions are good enough until I start seeing those prices decline. And then I'm like, hold on, I could buy. So, but yeah, that's what I've been thinking about.
I mean, the note about that is interesting about it is that if what happens is that under this hypothetical, what happens if your motivation, desire for the thing was based on the fact that it was valuable? So the price went down. No, now your desire goes away to get the thing. But that's different. That is different versus there's a sudden, basically like something is high value, and there's a sudden glitch in the website, and all of a sudden it was 1/10 the price.
Yeah,
that's an anomaly, like a local anomaly, irregularity in the market, and you're there to witness it. Then that's totally valid, right? Because then you're like, screw my thematic orientation, I'm going to get it now, right? So that is interesting on both sides of that. One is use thematic orientation because you don't know you're about, like, well, you have the theory to potential, but the one definitely is the case because it's based on that larger market demand and that value. Like, it's valuable because it's price point. This is in economics, things like Belbin goods. So there's a sociologist who made a comment that, like, sometimes, like, price is a messenger of indication, and people make a lot of inferences what that is. But in general, it's of something's attention. It's socially attentionable because of this price point. People make inferences of information based on that. right? And actually, the part of entrepreneurship, and I think on the other side of it, of thematic economic orientation, is to have a thematic orientation where you're valuing in a way the market doesn't see value. The example you gave me was that girl who was collecting Pokemon cards to complete her deck based on having apples in the card, like a completely random thing that, as you said, the broker, the salesman, like for Pokemon cards, had never conceived it, had no measurement of it, didn't even recognize that there was a pattern of this actually occurring in the Pokemon cards. So I think that's also what's so important here is the relationship of the social with evaluation and value, right? Value with evaluating and the social. I think that's actually what you're drawing up really nicely.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point when the price goes down. Now, I don't know enough about the space, but my hunch here is if there's what I'm thinking at least is if there's an alteration like that, and then it's like my theme kind of goes out the window, then in that space, the story that's being constructed is a very weak one. You know, like it's like, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying on the net yesterday, where it's like the stakes have to be high for it to be a good story. So I wonder in this space, the card dealing space, what that would mean. I think a stipulation would be, you know, if something alters like that for no reason really, and that just changed your whole story, doesn't sound like you were in a good story.
Yeah, I do have some questions because, like, I'll give you an example. Like what I'm talking about, because I brought this up to Jock, and I don't know if I told you specifically. Like I'm looking into like One Piece cards, like investments, right? And what's interesting is like people are catching on. One Piece has revealed like what they call manga cards, and they're super rare because they have like the manga background, like the comic background, basically with the characters in the foreground. If you look it up, it's like really cool cards, but they're also like cards that go for like tens of thousands of dollars. Okay. What's interesting about this is people are starting to question, why are they valuable? Why are they valuable? They don't quite understand, like, why are they valuable? Because there's other artworks of cards that almost have the same structure. They just don't have the manga background. Right? And so they're saying, like, I think these cards are actually cooler than the manga ones. And they're ironically cheaper. So I do feel like a part of what you're talking about, Luber, is like, and I sent you that screenshot of just like narrative drives speculation. I thought that was such a good, apt saying from a random commenter on YouTube, basically, that the narrative drives speculation. So it's the very fact that you have cards that are valuable and people don't really understand why. And it's just the narrative that the manga cards are just more valuable. And so I do think you are correct when you're saying, like, if the price drops and then you buy it, then you don't really have a competing narrative. I feel like that's what you're saying, Luber.
Yeah, I got kicked out for some reason.
Okay.
Can you just? I missed the point. I did miss the point that you made.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just
I
summarize.
was
real quick.
looking up the One Piece cards and I just got kicked out. I don't know.
Oh, okay. So basically, so One Piece has these cards called manga cards, right? They have the manga in the background. The community is starting to question, why are they valuable? Like, why are they inherently more valuable than other cards? And some guy did a video about, actually what's ironic about it is the card population is actually really high for these cards versus secret rares or whatever. I might be skewing the name of the other version of that. But anyways, the point is, what I was bringing up is, if someone's willing to buy a manga card at a cheaper price when they previously had a thematic, I do agree with you that it must have been a weak story. Or maybe not even a story at all. Because if narrative is what drives speculation, then the only way to have a better story is to have a competing story, essentially. But if those cards drop to really low prices, then, and people go for it, then that means that you don't have a competing story. But then I also think,
You don't have the main character.
Right.
If you don't have that competing element, sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but I would also say, what if that's also the sign that you need to, well, I guess it still agrees with you, right? That you need to make a better story, right? To compete with this position of pursuing, like, I think about the Apple girl because I'm like, I don't think she would pursue the manga card. Well, this is Pokemon, so, but I don't think she would buy like the really expensive Pokemon cards because it doesn't have apples. I really think, I don't know about this girl, but like, I find her very interesting that she only collects Pokemon cards that have apples in them. But all right.
Well, the build on that, it sounds like storytelling, narrative is very much attached to conviction, which is interesting. Is that necessarily certainty? I wonder about that. I don't think necessarily they're the same. And actually, that's a general rule in business, in leadership and business and entrepreneurship, is telling a story. Half of entrepreneurship is telling a story that picks out a certain particularity and then esteems it as valuable, and then makes bets and decisions based on that. And especially that other people will find it valuable. That's the other aspect of that too. But generally, it's that personal conviction aspect, which, if you want to put a psychoanalytic point of view, like at least from you guys, you can let me know how you guys feel about this. It's almost especially when it's to the point where you're just committed completely in yourself about it. It's symptomic in its nature, because you're not caring about other people's buying in. You're just going to do it regardless, So is that that confidence and conviction, is that the same as certainty? In one sense, it seems so. Another way, it doesn't seem so. Like, no one's gonna, having certainty that 1 + 1 = 2 is not the same thing as what we're talking about here now, are we? I think mainly because it's conviction. The way we're talking about in this case is of the contingent. It's of a difference that you orient your life around and you esteem as valuable. So you hold it as that's an Aristotelian point about prize versus praised. The main difference is that what's praised is like a sign of something that's good. So, for example, being strong is praised because health is prized. That's an example from Aristotle. Technically, actually, the classical point of view, we're all messed up because we think wealth is prized, like it's for its own sake, when that's never been classically the case. That's why we get the virtue of magnificence, for example, right? The idea, or liberality, right? Those are about the good use of funds, resources, for example. But people, so that would be praised that you have a lot of money. It's not prized for its own sake, because the qualification is what? Yeah, but what's the strength for? It's for health. Like, the fact that you're strong is a sign that you're healthy. What's the purpose of having money? To do great things, to do virtue. So I think I'm thinking about that kind of distinction. Luber.
Boy, we could really talk for hours. It's actually crazy. I think that's a really interesting distinction, because you're making me think, and this has to do with like even the shame, guilt distinction in a way, or at least I'm going to attempt to bridge it. It seems like conviction, there's like this futural element in conviction where certainty is very much of the moment. It's like I'm certain of this or that. But like it's almost like the conviction from a storytelling standpoint is not like I'm certain about a certain beat or moment in the story, whether it's the case if it's true or not. It's actually the truth value is placed on the entire story structure for conviction. It's like you have like I'm thinking of my writing partner who's very good at story structure, and it's like you can fill in the content in any which way, but it needs to fit within the certain structure. And he's like convicted about the structure, irregardless of the content in a way. And it seems like conviction has to do with that. And it's almost like, and I just don't know if it's on the same level as shame. I don't think it is, but for the sake of me attempting to bridge it, it's almost like shame has to do with almost like the story structure and not necessarily the content at hand. And maybe guilt has to do with more with the content at hand, similar to certainty. Like you see, like there's the level of the structure. Like this is where the rub is with what I'm saying. I don't know if beauty, where beauty is placed, is at the level of structure. I'm thinking maybe structure is further down the river, potentially. But then there's part of me is like, no. When there's a beautiful strike, there was a certain unfolding at play. That unfolding had that thematic structure that was strong, that afforded the ability to be in the position for the beauty to strike. Where shame, it's like you're following a certain structure, and then when it ends, it's the opposite of that beautiful strike moment, or a surprise. It's like with great disappointment, basically, comes at the end, something like that. But yeah, that you were just making me think that certainty has to do with the beats, the moment. Conviction has to do with the actual story structure at hand, which of course is futurally oriented because things can happen and you don't really give a shit because you're convicted because there's a certain structure at play, a certain unfolding at play where the content might not be solidified in your mind, but at least it follows some kind of structure. And even if there's a quote unquote hiccup in the moment, you rationalize overcoming it or looking past it or not taking that into account really because you're so convicted on the structure.
I mean, to build on that, it's like Daniel's planning for his preparation. Certainty is about planning, right? Things have to be very rigid and fixed for certainty to hold. Preparation is that readiness to respond to circumstances or to things that are unpredicted or aren't intended for in the beginning. I think that's right. I think that's a useful distinction here. I think another note is beauty is not the structure. I agree. It's beauty is that kind of, actually, that's why I'm pointing to this individual with conviction. Like it's in the individual who is the exemplar embodiment of the structure. Like they are the structure and the structure is them. Like by their activity, they're generating a new pattern actually through that. So for example, this Pokemon Apple Girl, for example, having a synthotic conviction on the valuation and actually holding to it with strong power, like real devotional conviction about it. What will happen is that people will start, if people it starts becoming literally a new orientation around that. You saw a little bit of that example when Javi was explaining about even the dealer was like, I didn't even know that was possible. Oh, wait a minute. And then you start seeing the pattern. This is very much like an entrepreneur can easily just spike that and keep pushing that hard. And eventually other people will start believing, will agree that Pokemon cards with apples are clearly superior, especially once a pricing mechanism and demand gets generated from that was called charismatic leadership orientation. In sociology, they talk about this, modes of leadership, and one of them is charismatic. And charismatic is a symphonic, convictional stance that this person, by their perspective orientation, they're having a direction, they're moving through it, and they orient others because of that, but not by compulsion. So just to kind of talk through that. So it's not necessarily any particular structure. It's the fact that this individual is like the embodiment of it. And it has this kind of surprising way to, like, a revealing, a current quality to it as well. So I think those are really interesting details about it.
I think when we think about a good story in unique spaces, or just in spaces that as an individual I'm not, or you're not, or whoever is doing the inquiry is not familiar with, it's really hard to think about what a good story is, because I think even under a domain where you have great understanding, it's still very hard to come up with a good story. Like, I just wanted to say, basically, like, it's very hard to like, with the card playing, it's hard for me to imagine, you know, especially when you put it in like that specific dimension of economics, like the economics of cards. It's like, who's the main character of the economics? It's like from my perspective, it already feels so abstract. Where like when I'm, and of course I'm biased, where it's like the stories that I'm thinking about are like particular social situations, you know, and then and then stories that I write and make. And it's like these particular social situations that I can see as a story are so unique. They're like not common to my life at all. Where I can actually like outline the supposed state and the hidden variable. Because here's the thing why it's really hard. There's always a hidden variable. There's always, oh, there's this piece of context that the people that are associated with the story, majority don't know about. Like, it doesn't need to be necessarily like that, but there always is this like aspect of something that's happening, or a context that's unknown, that's persisting throughout the stimuli or the phenomena that everybody is participating in. And then at a certain point in time, the repetition of, you know, following that, participating in that phenomena or situation, something gets revealed that surprises everyone that's participating in it. Even the people that know the hidden variable or the hidden context of it all will still be surprised, because they don't know how the other participants in that social situation will react to that hidden like to that hidden variable being revealed, and there being that surprise. um that's why for me it's just very difficult, like with the card playing situation, to kind of articulate what, oh yeah, that's not a good story, Javier, let me tell you what a good story is, so we have like a comparison. Because if we don't have that comparison, then it's like, Luber, what the fuck are you talking about then? How's that not a good story? Like, tell me then, you know? So I feel bad. I feel like guilty a little bit, where it's like, I really don't feel like I'm talking out of my ass, but the fact that I can't give that comparison for the card playing makes me feel like I'm talking. But yeah, go ahead, Jockin.
Well, it's in two parts. This one, if you're outside of a context, you don't know the dependencies. And actually, I think human beings are really bad at understanding the dependencies of circumstances or objects or events. Because we just look at things in the direct front in front of us. We don't realize, and that's the thing, when you're so knowledgeable in an area, you know the dependencies, you know the relationships that make a thing relevant, or what's at stake here. That's another aspect of love, care, right? Because actually that's the thing too. You can have a full schematical understanding, but if you don't have love in terms of a disposition of something that you care about, there's a good that you're oriented around, that you value, it doesn't make any sense. And usually what you care about, what you value, has dependencies. There's conditions why you love it. And what the Pokemon girl is showing is a whole different orientation of care, of what's dependent, what's the attunement of her care over a distinction that always existed, and it was always present, but was absent to those because it wasn't legible by the social order orientation of the general economic structure. Like that's us talking, that's me abstracting through what I'm seeing there. But in general, in terms of the good storytelling inside Pokemon trading, right? It's typically it's asking questions. What is everyone's object of desire? What is the people's object of desire? And what is the dependency of the relationships? When you're getting at though about what are the surprising variables? What are the dependencies that no one's seeing? Is that even if you're in a domain or in a context, you may not see all the dependencies. You may not see them. So thus for you, even someone in tuned into it may miss something that is actually super critical. And this is usually why a lot of times most things are catalysts for causes, not actual causes. You know? So I think actually that's also a very useful distinction too. A lot of times like that example I gave the Javier of like, let's say someone, right, makes a thematic orientation of Pokemon card collection for apples, but then sees on the trading website an anomaly, right? A catalytic anomaly where because of an error on the server or on a programming database, the price went down 1/10 the price. And then that's a catalyst. But the cause of like, why did she buy that card and betray her thematic orientation was because she didn't actually value that story, what she was telling everybody. She was actually really buying into the larger social order story of Pokemon cards are valuable because people value Pokemon cards, which is another way to put it. What Javier is saying is why the One Piece cards valuable, and why people are asking questions is because they're kind of calling out the bullshit to say people are just valuing this because people are saying they value it. It's a fiat claim. And that's actually the cause versus the catalyst, just in terms of drawing out those ideas.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I find problematic in the space is that people will try to counter this narrative by saying like, oh, you should pursue cards for their art, which I agree, but the problem is that that's too weak of a sentiment. Like that's literally too weak of a sentiment to even like begin anything. But what's funny is like I've been trying to experiment this thematically. Like what about One Piece cards that I could pursue? And I think just now in this conversation, I just realized a pattern that I actually do enjoy. And it's on the theme of friendship. There is cards from One Piece that have like usually a group of friends in them. And I was like, what if I pursued just those cards only, where it's just a group of friends in the cards versus having a main character in the card? Because what's funny about that is, ironically, for the market, the main character cards are ironically more valuable because people pursue those cards because, well, it's your favorite character, right? So this kind of plays again with something that we talked about before, Luber, which is like the friend of the beautiful is usually not the main character. It's usually not the main character. They're usually the side character that helps facilitate the main character. So I think this is interesting to think about even from like a market point of view, where it's like, I would think from a market point of view, you're not trying to be the main character. You're trying to be the facilitator of the friend who's driving the market in a different direction, or who's trying to drive the market in a different way of thinking about it. And I think that would be, in some sense, and I think if we substitute it like this, it wouldn't be story structure in the way that you probably think about it, Luber, in like in terms of like writing it out and like having these kind of sequential elements. But at the same time, it gets at the sentiment of you're changing the direction in which this narrative has already taken hold of a lot of people, which is we should pursue cards. You can almost put it like this. I don't know what the story is, but I can propose a different thematic command. Because the thematic command right now within the card market, whether it be Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z, all TCG right now in the same dilemma, which is scarcity is what proves the value of a card. Now, people will entirely agree with that sentiment across the board, but it's hard to deny that in concrete reality, the fact that we have scalpers, investors, people that sell the cards for $10,000, it does prove the fact that we do believe that scarcity proves the value of X thing. Even though people may have the sentiment of like, oh, I got into One Piece card collecting because I love One Piece. Okay, that's not a contradiction for you to also pursue scarcity for the sake of scarcity. That's not a contradiction. That doesn't conflict with each other. The issue is that when you come across that, Apple Pokemon girl, is that she adds a very particularity to that issue. Right? And this is what I like about this example is that I feel like the thematic command, or what constitutes a good story, is adding the particularity to the thematic command. Like, I think what drives the market are very bad stories, which is just like X is scarce, X is valuable. Versus a more thematic command driven market is this particular thing is valuable and not precisely because it's scarce. But ironically, you inverse the relationship between lack and particularity. Whereas in the market, it's lack is driving the the value, versus particularity is driving the lack. Right? I pursue cards that have apples. Well, now I have to figure out how many cards have apples. I guess maybe there's not a lot of cards that have apples, or maybe there is, or maybe there isn't. Right? But everything, the lack becomes a creative force in that sense. It's no longer just this given lack in a card because it's rare. It has to take account of a more constraint than that.
Yeah. A couple things, I guess. Like Ebert's freak theory.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the market gets saturated, and then what burps out on the other side of that saturation is now I have a $2 million card that's a piece of jewelry around my neck.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's something about that being a reality, but at the same time, it's not a good story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who cares? Like, the only reason why I care is because it's $2 million and now they're wearing it like jewelry.
Yeah.
and they're treating it like jewelry. And I get how that happened because of something like freak theory. I totally get that. But it's like the market can just crash. That card can be worth nothing, and then all of a sudden, that seems like it's the exposition of the story, and not the actual story. So, like, to what you're saying, where it's like, um, oh, I'm pursuing this really expensive card, and then it drops to nothing, and now it's like I don't really want to pursue it. That just sounds like the exposition of a story. Like I just wanted to push back a little on the. I I am a believer. I just haven't been able to figure it out.
I
But I
believe
am
it.
a believer of the sequential structure
Okay.
exists in real world in real life.
Mhm.
Like it actually exists. Like the structure, like basically, if something doesn't yet possess the orientation that we call virtue, then my guess is that what we're witnessing an exposition, an exposition to a story. So like all these theories that I'm like, yeah, that I buy that. But if it
Mhm.
doesn't tap into what is the appropriate like the orientation of the movement,
Mhm.
then we're still not getting to an inciting incident. Because the second we get to a place where we can implement the orientation element in the movement of whatever philosophical logic that's at play, there's going to be an impasse with an external force with real stakes. And the reason why I speculate that is because real stakes can only occur when the subject of the story or the story's operation, the way I think about it,
Mhm.
has a certain orientation that affords the stakes being that high. And like, um, I just haven't been able, like, outside of like us talking about like, virtue and ethics and Aristotle, I haven't really been able to conceptualize what that orientation is that affords that. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because um, everybody has a relationship to being an active character or not. You're
Yeah.
either active, less active, passive, etc., so forth. And I think like the real difference of what makes something an active character is this virtue orientation. Um, Otherwise, you're just going to get caught in a infinite regress of exposition. Just going to be exposition. You're going to get to the end, and then something's going to happen, and it's going to feel like nothing. It's going to feel like, okay, who gives a shit about, oh, the jewelry? That's sick. But then it's like you go home at the end of the night. I doubt Kevin O'Leary, for example, or Logan Paul, who has these ridiculous cards that they wear like jewelry, where they're like orienting their life around this jewelry. They're not doing that. They're going home and they're like, that was fun. Whooshing, throws it off, and then, you know, plays video games or something. I don't know. Kevin O'Leary blows up a business. I don't know. Like, it's like they're not orienting their life around that for real. And like what and like there it's a two-way street. It's like the external stimuli, whatever they're dealing with, has to be a real has to have to do with these real stakes, and your orientation in relation to that also has to really do with that real stakes that I'm referring to. But go ahead, Jack.
Well, it just reminds you of celebrities who are just famous because they're famous. It's the same kind of abstractional state, and in general, that's been like the main problem I think of modernity, which is because of our operations of abstraction, with living lives. Like that's everyone's crisis of meaning and nihilism is to do a bunch of stuff that's just an exposition that you get to the end termination of it, and it was all for naught. Then lack is nothing, right? I think that's actually I think that's a fair analysis or critique of basically modern life in general. There's no social order. The social orders that were presented and oriented around are basically expositions based on bad stories. That's why they're bad stories, because when they reach their conclusions, you're left with nothing. It feels like it was all for naught. You know? And then actually the stories that traditionally are meant to orient your life, children, right, marriage and all that, they're put into complete, like they have similar issues. They don't have a sense of completion, or they don't have a sense of, when they conclude of, and it's actually a very useful thing. Actually, I'm going to put it this way. They don't have a sense of, they used to have a sense of belonging, because it was part of and this is the thing, I talked about this last week in the course, is that the word cosmos means adoration, crown, adornment. Also it means a sense of, people think it means order. It doesn't necessarily mean it that in the way we normally think about it. It's the totality that's all abundant at once. It's basically the idea, like there's a sense, and I think when Daniel talks about belonging, I think cosmos in the classical sense is I think those are very close associations, because you can have meaning and not have belonging, and that's also what the modern project gave you. Like meaning comes from your stories you tell yourself, and you can have those. But what we're talking about here is that all these leads, when you have meaning and no belonging, you only have expositions. You don't have the inciting incident into a great story that calls on you. You answer the call, right? And you go on the great journey of a story. That's because there's no sense of belonging. There's just basically the meaning you're getting is just like it's a narrational story. And then when you get to conclusions of those, you find there were nothing in the end of it, because they're just interchangeable. They could just swap one for the other. There's no stakes on it. There's no permanence or kind of, I think idea of dependence and having something at stake here is actually a very important detail about this, Lucas. I think I really appreciate you bringing that up. Javier, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of brought this up to Luber yesterday, but gave me the Heideggerian answer. But I'm still a little bit I don't know how to make sense of stakes exactly. But I do want to, because I feel like if you were to say something like, if you mean stakes as conflict, I could see it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, but anyways, I want to share this example of the for example, like the Pokemon community. I've been watching these videos where they break the you could say like they do a very charitable thing. So for example, if it's like a little kid, and they like their favorite Pokemon cards like Mewtwo or something, right? They'll be like, yeah, I really want this card. And then the mom's like, oh, it's like $200. I don't know about that, sweetie. Right? What I notice is that usually these vendors, they're streaming, and the people will feel so adamant about the child wanting that Mewtwo that they will donate money in the stream. So that way the little girl could get the Mewtwo. And then so the vendor will be like, here you go. And the mom's like, wow, really? You're just going to give it to my daughter? And they're like, yeah, people decide to like donate like whatever money they like heard her like really wanting it, and they like donated her the money. It's like the most wholesome thing to like see, really. And there's plenty of videos like that, even without children involved. It's, people being like, I've been searching for this card forever. I don't really have the money or something like that. And sometimes the vendor will just be like, here you go. And they're like, for real? They're like, yeah, I just want you to complete your collection. It makes me feel good to see you complete your collection. So I'm going to give you this card because I feel like it's a really good thing to see you complete that collection. So there's something really interesting there that's being cultivated. I don't even know what cultivates it, to be honest. But I could say this. I feel like when you guys were giving the modern critique, I feel like that's because we've lost the ability to do things for the sake of itself. Which is why the stake language feels very like foreign to me, because what I hear is, oh yeah, we've just completely lost doing things for the sake of itself. Because if you could do things for the sake of itself, then in some sense, the stakes doesn't matter. Because you're going to do things for the sake of itself. It's only when the stakes matter that you really are doing things for a means rather than an end. Because those people are willing to give up their profit. You can say those are stakes. Those are real stakes, right? They're losing profit. They're willing to lose maybe a good chunk of change to give this card to somebody else, right? Let's put aside like the people watching donating. They're willing to give up just to see a completion happen. So can we really say like this is when the quote stakes matter? But I feel like the stakes maybe matter when you're in a position where you're struggling with the for sake of itself proposition. And that does make for a more interesting story, which is why I think the Friend of the Beautiful is a boring character from the main character point of view. But I feel like from a main character point of view, if you're struggling with the in itself, for the sake of itself proposition, then high stakes, low stakes is something you struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I like to think about it in terms. It's like it's not whether do the stakes matter. It's what are the stakes. It's more about like just what are the stakes. So like what that means is there's a real cost and consequence if what you're pursuing fails. Like there's a tangible, felt, real cost at play.
I know, but what I'm trying to get at is when you pursue something for the sake of itself, that cost is, I'm not saying that the cost doesn't exist, but it's basically irrelevant.
Like I'll give an example. I'll just give an example because I see I see what you're saying. I'm writing a story right now where the inciting incident is this girl this girl returning back into this person's life. I'm being very vague, but you'll see the point. What motivates him isn't the girl coming back into his life. That's not what the stakes are. The stakes have nothing to do with romance, really. The stakes have to do with the main character being perceived as being cool to his friends. And the girl coming back and how it affects his past trauma jeopardizes his optics, jeopardizes the stakes for him, which is his social status amongst his quote unquote peers. So typically, the inciting incident in itself isn't the stakes. Like the external force isn't the stakes. It's what it does to the existing. It's how it affects the existing stakes of the main character. Like the main character is already in it. Like the external force doesn't like give you the stakes. It presents what was already there and makes you have to be active for the first time. And if it's a comedy, the way in which you're active is detrimental to the aim or goal that the main character has in relation to the stakes. So like my character runs away when the girl comes, which in his mind made him look bad to his friends. So now the second act is like, how do I look cooler to my friends, basically?
Yeah, and to build on that, on the examples you gave, Javier, so that the vendor who gave the Pokemon card, if you notice what he did, there is stakes. He rejected the story of profit because there was a better story that he oriented around. Like if you notice here, it's like, so the idea here of the beautiful not having stakes, the stakes is which story you're going to choose to be participating in. And it's a free choice. That's why there's stakes, because it's not a forced compulsion to have to be this or that. It's a choice. That vendor could have easily chosen the profit narrative and say, sucks for you, kid. Or sucks for you. You don't get to complete your deck. So isn't that interesting? So what's interesting about why beauty has a sense of hope attached to it, of the beautiful, because even in the trap of the good, of this operation of economic transaction and profit, this individual had a choice, and he chose a better. He said that story I don't like that story. I like this other story better, and I'm willing to pay the price of this other story not being fulfilled because this other one is better. I find that is a really interesting tell right there in terms of the stakes is in the matter of the subject's choice and which orientation of the story they choose to be in. And then also which one is he orienting his life around. And it's in those encounters of decision that gets revealed.
But I'm just saying, Javier, like the stakes to me have to do with not any particular thing that's happening, but the relation that grants how the main character is oriented to the things that are happening around them.
Yeah, well, I mean that's what I'm saying. Like this is what I'm saying. Like I feel like if you're pursuing something for the sake of itself, you don't really get thrown into that change of directory. Like, okay, for example, right? Like if you fall in love with someone, what's the stakes? Well, the stakes are you could get cheated on, you could break up. There's always stakes. And that could change your trajectory, right? You live your life single, or you decide to not pursue this person because you're afraid of the possibilities of being broken up with or them cheating on you, right? But if you say something like, love is worth it, even if it's contingent, then the stakes doesn't matter.
That sounds like an exposition.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like I think what you're setting up is, because I look at it from the position of the reason why it's an exposition for you is because we're talking about characters that struggle with the in itself trajectory.
Well, no, maybe I misunderstood. Like to me, it's like the exposition is the main characters doing the goal for the sake of the goal. And then the external force comes in and it reveals that what they're doing isn't really for the sake of their goal. There's more to it, and that's when the journey starts.
Yes.
And that's when the journey starts. So like it's like when Bard says like you want to do art for art's sake, that is total like exposition to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because
just to build on that, like that example of love, right? The issue is like that's just saying I'm willing to engage in a relationship again because I think it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
That's just I think it still proves the point because it's acknowledging there are risks involved, but this person made a call to say, I acknowledge those risks, but nevertheless, I say I move forward with this relationship because there's something more important than that pain or that harm.
Yeah, but
which is interesting because actually that's slightly different from even the Pokemon example because that's a choice of not getting a benefit, right? Versus the risk of getting damaged or harmed.
I just look at it like it's I feel like when you say it's exposition at the beginning, it's still the same goal at the end. Like, for example, like if I give like a theological point, right? The exposition of a theological beginning is to love God for being God, right? Your spiritual journey ends up being that you struggle loving God for the sake of God because you like having the spiritual cookies involved. You like looking virtuous, right? But what's the end? What happens in the end? At the end of the saints, they love God for the sake of being God. So it's like it starts off, you could say, expositionally with this goal. But what I'm saying is you're still going to end, ironically, you could say expositionally, but it's just the fact that you had to go through the journey of, oh, I can't, it's not that you can't start there. It's the fact that you have to develop into that position. And that's what I'm willing to concede to. I'm willing to concede that you have to develop into that position. Because if you begin in that position, that assumes you already have the constraints and the understanding to deal with that position. If I were to say to normal people that you should pursue love because it's worth it, despite the fact that it's contingent, many people would buy it, but they would have a hard time embodying that.
Yeah, living it.
Right? So what I'm trying to say is that if you look at from the end point of view backwards, the stakes in some sense doesn't matter. But the stakes only matter because you're still developing, and you need that as your sense of development.
Yeah, because we need limits, we need boundaries, we need articulations. You know, even on the example actually with theology, the problem is you actually find out usually typically the stories of the saints, they actually didn't know God. They're chasing images. They were chasing things that were not God, thinking they were, right? And actually the whole point of, no one can make the argument from a lot of traditions that the saints' end, which is also very interesting, not their choice, because it's death. Typically that's right? They see God face to face. So it's an encounter. To see him finally. So even when we say that, the stakes in that is always, where are they turning? Where are they looking? Right? Where's their attention on? Like just on that point. So that's why it's a little tricky, only because even if it's the same name object being referred to at the beginning and at the end, the content of that name might be very different, especially your relationship to it.
Because I look at stakes as almost like from the Buddhist mystical point of view, where it's like stakes would drive your suffering, and you're trying to delineate how much or how little you want to suffer, right? But when you enter into those states of self-surrender, selflessness, etc., there's a sense in which those stakes, maybe I'm not using a good phrase, it's not that they don't matter, but they don't have like the visceral impact. Like basically you allow them to happen.
Yes. No, that's definitely true. I think it's definitely true.
That's what I would say. Like they, in some sense, they don't matter because you allow them to happen. So when you pursue love for the sake of itself, you allow for the possibilities of, I could get cheated on. They could break up with me. They could die before we get married. Like all these things. The fact that you accept all those things and surrender yourself to all those contingencies is, to me, what I say, making the stakes not matter. That's how I interpret the stakes not mattering. Even though they would still have like, quote, impact, right? Because obviously your girlfriend wouldn't exist anymore.
So.
And unfortunately, I need to leave in 2 minutes, everybody, unfortunately.
Okay. I'll try to make this quick. Basically, I think the stakes. Like, even Farron, the show Farron, she has stakes, but the stakes are involving the growth of the other. Versus the main character, the stakes are involving the growth of themselves. So I agree with you in terms of the Buddhist perspective is like if you're a main character, it is going to have to do with suffering. But if you are a friend of the beautiful, there's still stakes, but it doesn't have to do it. The stakes have to do with you in a secondary way, is my hunch.
Okay.
And then yeah.
We gotta close it. We got gentlemen. We gotta
Yeah,
close
we
it
gotta
out.
close it. Okay.
Everybody, have a good night. Later, every gang.
All right. Later.
I made the same mistake.